Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name's Neil Perry, and in today's short webinar, we'll be looking at a quick introduction to Security Gateway. Just a quick overview of the things we're going to talk about today. I'll start with a look at the main sort of general features of the product, and then we'll look a little bit more in depth on how you can deploy Security Gateway on site, and also we'll have a quick chat about using Security Gateway in hosted environments. I want to talk for a little while about user verification and how Security Gateway manages users and how it makes things very easy for adding in lots of users onto the system. The main part of the webinar will be looking at the security features that are available in Security Gateway, and I'll quickly go through the key ones there and just show you some screenshots to highlight those features. We'll wrap up then with the logs and reporting side of the product, which is one of its main selling points, and how easy it is to find and look at how the server's being used. And then finally, the user's interface, how users can interact with Security Gateway and what features they get. So to start with, some of the sort of general features of Security Gateway. It generally is an on-premise software solution, so it is a piece of software for Windows servers. We've historically sold it as an on-premise solution. However, we are seeing that people do like to use the product in a hosted environment. That's absolutely fine. There's no reason why you can't use it in a hosted environment to protect a hosted Exchange server, let's say. But generally speaking, I'll be talking today mostly as if it was being used on site. Security Gateway is completely controlled through a web interface. There's no need to, once you've installed the software, to actually log into Windows from then on. You can do everything through that web interface. It's not just for Exchange. It does support all SMTP servers, so that you can install it in front of multiple different products. We ourselves use Security Gateway in front of our daemon mail server. It's a multi-level layered email firewall. By that, I mean there's many different security solutions built into Security Gateway that allow it to protect from spam and malicious attack. It's got very powerful login and reporting. There's a very nice graphical interface to show you those logs and reports, but that's really useful for monitoring email traffic, not just coming into the network, but also leaving the network, especially in front of Exchange servers where it's very difficult often to see exactly what's going on. It will work quite happily on a Windows Server platform, but it'll also run on Windows 7 and upwards. There's no need for SQL Server. It will run quite happily on a very basic machine. It uses a built-in Firebird database. So system resources wise, it's very low generally. So how do we normally see Security Gateway deployed? Generally speaking, we're thinking about on-site solutions where a typical customer would have an internet gateway firewall, an on-site Exchange server or daemon server or any other email platform. And the idea is that Security Gateway would sit in front of that Exchange platform, or that mail platform rather. SMTP email arriving at the network is then directed to Security Gateway. It does its pre-filtering, decides what's safe to send on, and passes that on to the mail server behind it. So if we look at a very sort of standard solution where Security Gateway is installed on a dedicated machine, or I should say on a virtual machine, it's not necessarily a physical dedicated machine, but a Windows machine of its own right, then you'd expect that SMTP email coming into the network, the router would redirect that port 25 traffic, standard port 25 traffic, to the Security Gateway machine on port 25. That itself does the pre-filtering and sends it on to the mail server on port 25. So it's a very simple solution when you've got a dedicated machine or virtual machine for Security Gateway. If you want to install Security Gateway on the same server as the mail server, which is quite popular, you have to think a little bit more about ports and how you can set that up, because only one service can answer on one port at the same time. So what we generally recommend is that the SMTP traffic arriving at your router on port 25 is actually translated to a different port. So that's port address translation, or PAT. So your router has to support this. Most do, but it's worth checking. So inbound traffic on 25 actually gets redirected to the mail server on port 26. And we use any port, but port 26 is easy to remember. And that, by changing the port, you can then set up Security Gateway to answer on port 26. It does its pre-filtering, and it sends it then onto Exchange, effectively the same machine, but on port 25. So it still works in the same topology. You know, everything goes through Security Gateway and then gets to the mail platform, but there's this change of ports as we go. Outbound email is also worth sending through Security Gateway. Often people forget that, you know, you need to send your email through Security Gateway on the way out. And one of the main reasons you do that is to analyze and detect legitimate email. You want Security Gateway to understand and see mail leaving your network to recipients that you trust. And it can learn from that, and it can help detect a valid email coming in. So what we would do in the same scenario is you'd actually tell the mail server, or Exchange in this example, to use a smart host. And by that, you're effectively saying, don't resolve where to send email, send everything to a specific server. And in this case, we send it to Security Gateway. In the same scenario, you therefore use port 26 because you're sending it to the same machine, usually the local host loopback address, on port 26. Security Gateway would answer that email, and then it would deliver it for you. So it then sends out on port 25, and it goes out and leaves your network in the normal way. So that way, you're filtering inbound email and controlling outbound email. Another key feature for outbound is the ability to tag and change actual footers on the email messages as well. Now, when you first set up Security Gateway, one of the first things you need to do is to allow it to integrate with your user database. And the reason you do this is you don't really want to have to go into Security Gateway and manually add every single user on the email platform and email address and potentially any aliases. That would be very long-winded. On a very small setup, it may be workable, but on most solutions, you want to automate that task. And Security Gateway has several features that allow it to find out the users on the network. In a typical Exchange environment, you would actually be linking into Active Directory. So you'd set up a user verification source, and you'd point it to the local Active Directory. You may require authentication to do that, and you would effectively say, whenever I receive an email to a new user that's unknown, query Active Directory and find out if that user is a valid user, or is it an email address that's going to an alias, for example. And that way it can build up a knowledge of local users' email addresses. There are other methods. If you connect into an mdaemon server, mdaemon has its built-in Minger user authentication protocol. It's a very similar scenario, but you can query an mdaemon server and ask it the same thing. Does this user exist? Is it a unique user, or is it an alias? Failing that, there is you can roll back to standard SMTP verification call forward. So if you're using Security Gateway in front of a remote SMTP server, then you can effectively open up a new SMTP session and ask, is the address valid or not? And on the basis of that response, then you can decide whether to add that user into Security Gateway. So user verification is a great way of automatically building up a very large user database. So let's have a look at some of the sort of security features in Security Gateway. I mentioned before it's a multi-layer solution. By this, I mean it's not just anti-spam and antivirus. I mean, those are two key areas, but there's multiple protocols and security solutions within there to protect against spam and viruses. But there's also some key important features for anti-hijacking and the server being used to spam the world. And also another very important area is reputation, being able to detect the reputation of inbound mail and where the mail's coming from, but also protect your reputation sending email and your domain to make sure that other servers believe that you're the sender that you claim to be, and that they know that they're talking to the real sender and not somebody spoofing your address. So let's just, before I start going through the different technologies here, I just wanted to point out that Security Gateway is a multiple domain solution. It's not tied to any particular domain. You can use an unlimited number of domains with Security Gateway, but all of the settings I'll show you are domain specific. So if you've got different domains for that require different levels of protection, then you can alter everything on a per domain basis. So if we start by looking at the anti-spam features, one of the key features that stands out, and the one that really does a majority of the anti-spam protection, is the Outbreak protection. This is provided through a plugin by CYRE, and CYRE are an online malware and spam detection technology, online database that's updated through multiple vendors. This is not just an Alt-N specific solution, and its job is to well, effectively, Security Gateway receives the email and it looks at patterns within the message, and it passes those patterns over to CYRE and asks CYRE, does this message look like a large number of email that's flowing around the internet right now? If it does, has it been tagged or has it been seen by lots of other solutions that believe it to be spam? And this shared knowledge of live messages allows Security Gateway to detect new spam attacks in that 0 hour, that very early growth of a spam attack. And based on that detection, you can do several things. Generally speaking, we refuse the message outright, but you do have the option, if you prefer, to tag messages with subject lines and add scores to the message. And you can, if you prefer to receive messages that are borderline, but make it clear to the user that it thinks they're spam, but you want to check it, you can go down that route, or you can refuse messages outright if CYRE believes that the message is definitely spam, but if it's borderline and it thinks it's potentially spam, maybe tag it. It's very customizable. I won't go into the finer details of every setting in this way, but I wanted to show this screenshot to give you the idea that you as a user, you can tweak the settings to suit your business requirements. Heuristic and Bayesian filtering is the sort of more classical rules-based filtering. So there are a set of rules provided by Spam Assassin, and Spam Assassin allows you then to look for known spam mails based on things like the body of the message, if it contains certain frequency of words, a certain capitalization, those sort of rules. They're updated automatically, but again, that helps as a sort of second layer to detect known spam types. Backscatter is a very nice feature that allows you to protect the spam that you see, which is actually fake bounces. When you get sort of obliterated by messages coming in that look to be undeliverable reports, but you never actually sent the original message, or if somebody's sending spam out using your domain and you get all those bounces, Backscatter stops that. It protects you by only looking for messages. It knows that only looking for, replies or bounces to messages that it knows that you've previously sent. It tags messages leaving the server, and then it can detect messages coming back to the server. So it's a very useful way of cleaning up. It's more a nuisance-based spam rather than the material it contains. It's just you might get bombarded with lots of invalid, undeliverable messages. Then we've got our traditional DNS blacklist support. So there are known blacklists like SpamCop and SpamHouse that have lists of IP addresses of known spamming senders. And Security Gateway can query those lists and say, well, is this sending server on one of your lists? And if so, remove it accordingly. The URI blacklists are very similar, but instead of asking is the IP address of the server on that list, it's actually looking in the body of the message, and it's looking for URLs that are contained in that message, and it's checking for those URLs. So effectively, it's your malware attacks. Those email messages that are coming in, the actual text of the message may change every time, but the links it's going to, or it's trying to get users to click on to open up a malware attack, those are known about, and they're listed on lists of in Serval. So Security Gateway is querying those URLs to see if they're ones that are known about and blocking based on that check. Any messages that Security Gateway detects as being potentially malicious, it can quarantine. And generally speaking, the idea is that you quarantine messages that are borderline. You block messages outright if you know they're definitely spam. And then in the quarantine, you've got this ability to then alert users periodically throughout the day, maybe every few hours. Usually most people stick with the daily option. And the idea being that users themselves can then see a quarantine report, I'll show you this a little bit later on, and make decision on those borderline messages. It's not necessarily an administrator's task to keep an eye on those messages. The antivirus protection in Security Gateway is provided by two engines. Primarily, the CYRE engine is still there to protect against known and very new virus signatures in the same way that it detects against spam. It's looking for unique patterns within attachments for threats that are known about. But there's also a secondary AV engine provided by ClamAV, and that then does a secondary scan of every attachment just in case there's some other message that's got through, to give you that peace of mind that all viruses are picked up and quarantined accordingly. The antivirus settings themselves are very similar. You've got the ability to refuse a message outright or quarantine. Most people prefer to refuse, but occasionally, while you're getting used to the software, it might be worth quarantine messages just so you can check what has been caught. And you have, I should mention here as well, most of the security options have the ability to exclude messages from whitelisted servers as required. So if you've got certain servers and trust, you can minimize the overhead by not needing the AV to kick in. But it's quite a unique requirement, that one. On top of the actual antivirus filtering, you can filter on attachment type. So if you know that you don't want to receive specific types of attachments, you can do that, block them at the gateway, or you can quarantine them. So you can have a sort of manual step requirement that if you start receiving any attachments or specific attachment extensions, then quarantine them, and users have to go in and double check before they actually bring them down to the client's machine themselves. When messages get quarantined, the administrator can see them. It's possible as an administrator to see what's in the quarantine. If you want to do that on behalf of the user, you can go and look in the quarantine, and you can open the messages or release them or delete them outright if you know that they're not required. You don't have to rely on users managing the quarantine. A good feature that's often overlooked, it's not really a spam feature, we're now talking more about sort of an anti-hijack feature, is the IP shielding. And IP shielding is all about understanding if email using local addresses, so email arriving at Security Gateway claiming to be from a domain that Security Gateway is protecting, your own domains, your local domains. If it's not coming from a known IP range, then you can be pretty sure that it's a malicious spoof. So by turning on IP shielding and defining all your IP addresses, you can get rid of a large amount of spam and malware attacks that are trying to get access to your mail system by trying to trick the mail server into believing it's a local user. So IP shielding is definitely worth putting on. If you have remote users, and people often say to me, well, what about remote users that could have any IP address? Generally speaking, they shouldn't be connecting to the server unless they're authenticating. They're using SMTP authentication. So you'll see at the bottom there's an exclude message from authenticated sessions. That's a typical way of saying, well, if you're authenticated, if you know the user account details, then we don't need to pass this IP shielding check. Account hijack detection is one of the newer features, and this is very useful for picking up on accounts that have been compromised. It is possible. I mean, it's all really down to the quality of your passwords in users' accounts. But it is always possible that an account gets compromised. The username, email address, and password is known. In that scenario, it is possible to send volumes of email through Security Gateway. So what the account hijack detection does is it picks up on large volumes of mail, and based on a criteria, for example, here 50 messages in 15 minutes is a typical example. That would be considered, it's too much for the average user. So let's let's actually disable the account outright. It's a very customizable thing. It does depend on how you use the mail platform, but it does allow you, the system, to pick up on unusual activity on an account and stop it before your server gets seen to be a spamming source. And that's usually the worst part of your server being compromised, is that you get on a list as a known spammer, and you have to spend a large amount of time to get off that list again to be able to send legitimate email. So anti-hijack is definitely worth having on your network. Relaying itself is very important. I mean, we're talking about authenticated sessions here, but if you didn't have relaying control, then you'd be able to just send an email from an external domain claiming to be to another external domain, and Security Gateway will just pass that on for you. So out of the box, Security Gateway doesn't allow you to relay messages, to just bounce messages through it and spam the world. There are several settings here to detect that the sending server is valid, and there are certain scenarios when you do need to relay. So there are the ability to have exceptions there, but generally speaking, relaying should be off, and you don't allow external clients to send email through Security Gateway. Bandwidth throttling is pretty self-explanatory, really, but if you want to limit the amount of traffic that is used on the network by Security Gateway, you can do for both inbound and outbound SMTP connections. Very useful if you feel that your email is taking over your broadband connection and you really want to sort of minimize that. A lot of the time, email can get delayed and users aren't that aware. It's when it gets delayed by large amounts of time, hours and hours, then it's obvious. But if if you're just trickling data out at maybe 50% of the bandwidth capability of the network, then users won't appreciate it. Whereas having lots of spikes where it uses all of the network, they can suddenly think, well, why is the internet suddenly going slow? So bandwidth throttling can be very useful. Now, just sort of wrapping up with some of the more sort of technical features of Security Gateway. When it comes down to reputation protection, SPF, or Sender Policy Framework, is widely used now, but this allows you to basically tell the world who is a valid sender for your domain, and you do that through a domain record, and you list all of the mail servers that can send email as your domain. So there's two parts of integration in Security Gateway. There's the first part is to actually check inbound servers. So when email arrives at Security Gateway, it can go and look up the domain record and say, well, does that domain have an SPF record? If it does, is the email actually arriving from one of the email servers listed in that SPF record? If it is, then chances are it's a valid email. If it isn't, then is this somebody else claiming to be the sending server? So often you'll see emails coming from well-known domains, banks, Barclays, HSBC, all the banks' domains. Spammers often try to use that to trick you into thinking it's a legitimate email. Well, if that bank, and a majority of banks do these days, have an SPF record, then straight away it's obvious that it's not coming from one of the mail servers at Barclays. It's not coming from HSBC. This is coming from some random IP address, probably a compromised home user's machine. Therefore, Security Gateway can say straight away, I know that's not coming from Barclays, and it can get rid of it. So SPF, even though it's a relatively technical background solution, even if you don't protect your own domain, just by checking other people's SPF records and the options there on by default, you can very easily validate, is this actually who they say they are? So definitely worth doing. I should mention you can also create an SPF record yourself, but that's actually a domain-based solution. We can help with that. That's part of our service, is to explain how these technologies work. Callback verification, not used so much these days, but this is the ability to check the sending server of a domain. So if you receive an email from fred@blogs.com, you can query that domain and say, well, is there a user fred@blogs.com? Tends to work most of the time. Unfortunately, a lot of servers won't allow you to query them in that way. So it's a little bit hit and miss. It's an older technology that's still there where required, but generally speaking, it's been superseded by technologies like SPF. Reverse lookups are all about checking the, first off, whether the server that's sending email actually exists. If it's coming from a domain, does that domain actually exist? Does the name that's passed in the hello statement, which is part of the SMTP communication, does the domain it's claiming to be exist, and is it valid? And is there a reverse PTR record? Is the IP address it's coming from, does that point to an actual mail server name, or is it just you know, a home DSL account? These are all basic checks that you can say, is the sender a company? Have they actually gone to the effort of setting themselves up with a correct DNS record, etc.? Oh, they're all little checks in their own right, but added together, it's building up a picture of, is this a valid sender or not? And again, it can help you know, filter out those invalid senders that aren't actually mail servers. Domain keys, DKIM, a slight extension on what we were talking about with SPF. What DKIM allows you to do is not only just sort of advertise the servers that you're sending from, but actually you tag messages. So you actually put a signature on the bottom of every message. And Security Gateway can sign messages leaving the network, and then the receiving server can say, well, actually, yes, it has come from that domain because they have this domain DKIM record that I can check, and has the message changed in transit. And vice versa, if anybody's sending you email and they've gone to the effort of creating a DKIM DNS record, you can check that message and say, is it coming from the valid sender? Has that message changed between the sender's server and my server? Very important when we see DKIM used a lot between any financial organizations that need to guarantee messages between servers haven't been intercepted and changed. So I won't go into any more detail here in this overview video, but DKIM is a very interesting technology that you should use if you want to protect your identity and make sure that, you know, what you send is definitely what the receiver gets. So let's have a quick look at the login and reporting side of Security Gateway. It's quite difficult to show in a webinar like this, but some quick sort of overview that you probably saw early on, that there's a very nice graphical interface to Security Gateway. The graphs allow you to see any sort of unusual activity. You can click on the graphs to drill down into more detail and see actual message lists in the message log. And the message log is probably the first place that most people go in Security Gateway. You can see every message live as it arrives. It's in the column view. They can click on those messages. They can see if they were accepted or rejected, why they were rejected potentially is all explained there. And then you can click further into every message and see the complete transcript of that SMTP session. So it's really easy to see, you know, exactly what happened and why. What did Security Gateway do with that message? Did it send it onto the Exchange server? What did the Exchange server say in that scenario? You can even see the body of the message. You can log, you know, if the message hasn't been delivered, or if it has been delivered and you've got the history turned on, you can still see exactly what that message was and get details. So it's very, very powerful, and purely as a way of visualizing what your email traffic is. It's a very useful tool indeed. So a message log is a quick example of what a message log would look like. And you've got to imagine this is changing and live. I mean, every time you refresh this page, or there's a refresh button at the top, you'll see the latest mail. So you can see, you know, the timestamp, who it's from, the recipient, the subject of the message, and then the outcome. And then if there's you know, a message is rejected or quarantined, the reason for that, as well as the size and the actual potential score. So even at that overview level, you get a very good picture of what's going on. But like I said, you can drill down further and actually look at the session transcript itself. The session transcripts are color coded, so it helps you visualize. There you can see in red, that's the initial SMTP session. You know, the red is what's leaving Security Gateway. The blue is what's been sent in, and you can sort of see the communication in both directions. You can see, you know, it's been authenticated there as a particular user. It's very detailed logging, but it's very easy to read compared to a lot of logs where everything's just thrown into one big log file. You can see it on a per session basis. Users themselves, they do have access into Security Gateway. Primarily, it's for one reason, and that's to get their spam quarantine report. So usually once a day, they would get an email like this that would say, here are your spam messages for today. these are messages that have gone into the quarantine. They're still available should you want them, and the user can just release them one at a time as required. Or if they think no, they're definitely all spam, they can delete all the messages. Or if they want to, they can view them in the quarantine and have a bit more look at them before they release them if they're unsure. So it does take the load off the administrator to be able to manage the quarantine messages better. Users can get used to seeing a few messages a day, and then as they release or delete them, the detection rates increase as well, because it's learning from what users are doing. If they do actually click on the quarantine link, then they get their own sort of mini security gateway interface where they can see everything in their quarantine and look at it like an admin would, and have a drill down into those messages and look at the sessions themselves. Obviously they can't set up anything else, but they can sort of see their own settings. They can manage their own blacklists and whitelists if required from this interface. And there's an example of what a personal message log would be if you as a user wanted to see, well, what's Security Gateway received for me in the last day, or you can search in that message log as well if you're looking for messages. So you can almost use it as a way of tracking email from a user's point of view. They don't have to think about it as being just administrators look into the mail platform. They can go in and see who sent me a message, what happened to that message. If you've not received a message, then it might be an ideal time to just have a quick look. Roughly when it was sent, or who it was from. You can do a search on that information, find the message and see, oh yes, it was quarantined, or it was rejected because of this reason. So that really sort of wraps up the main part of the webinar. Just some next steps. If you haven't already, if you're looking at this and you haven't already downloaded, there is a free 30-day trial for Security Gateway. Highly recommend you download that. It's fully functional. You get everything within the product. It's a single install on one executable, so it's very simple and quick to install. Definitely worth doing. You don't need a server operating system. Like I said, if you just want to test this and maybe send your email through it inbound temporarily, then you can do that. If you're one of our resellers already and you're really interested in reselling Security Gateway, you just need to enable the option in your partner profile. Just a simple tick box, and straight away you'll be able to benefit from the additional discount we offer for resellers. There is a not-for-resale license as well available for partners. It's limited to 25 users, but that's the only limitation. Other than that, it's fully functional. As well, don't forget that we always have marketing material to help you promote Security Gateway, as well as all our other products. Let's not forget. That's all available on our website as well. We're here as well for pre-sale support. So if you're thinking about testing Security Gateway, you don't really know where to start, you want some help just getting things set up, give us a call. That's what we're here for. Once you've got it installed in the system, we can remote it, and we can help you install it and get it running in your environment. Of course, if you've got any other questions about the product, by all means, give us a call about those as well.